In the heart of the kingdom of Zoria, the towering spires of the royal palace gleamed under the light of twin moons. This was a place of splendor and ancient traditions, where the royal family held power and influence over the land. But amid all the grandeur, there was one who felt trapped in her own life, Princess Ilara. Ilara, the king's only daughter, had lived a life of luxury and privilege, but her world was suffocating. Despite the riches and admiration from her people, she often found herself yearning for something more than what royal duties and expectations offered. Every day was a carefully calculated routine, filled with lessons on diplomacy, the arts, and preparing to marry a prince who could solidify her kingdom's alliances. She was never asked what she wanted, never asked to choose her own path. The weight of her responsibilities pressed heavily on her shoulders, and Ilara often wondered what it would be like to feel free, to follow her own heart. But that was not to be. Not for someone of her status. She had been promised to Prince Darius of the neighboring kingdom, a man she had never met but whose presence loomed over her like a shadow. Marriage for the sake of peace. That was the royal way. The day everything changed began like any other. Ilara sat in the grand hall of the palace, draped in royal garments, her mind far away. Her father, King Orion, had been speaking of politics and the upcoming alliance with Prince Darius, but Ilara's mind wandered, her gaze drifting out of the grand window. She didn't want to hear about alliances. She didn't want to think about her future with a man she'd never chosen. She wished for something different, something real. Then a loud commotion interrupted her thoughts. The doors to the hall flew open, and in marched a group of soldiers led by a man whose presence immediately captured her attention. He was unlike anyone she had ever seen. Tall, strong, and with a presence that radiated confidence, the man was a human soldier, dressed in simple but sturdy armor that was a stark contrast to the lavish royal garb of the room. His piercing blue eyes scanned the hall, taking in his surroundings, but it was when his gaze landed on Ilara that everything changed. For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The bustling chatter of courtiers, the rustling of velvet gowns, the whispers of advisors, everything faded away. There was just him and her. His eyes were intense, but there was something softer there, a warmth that contrasted with the stern look he gave the room. He didn't belong here. He was just a soldier, a mere commoner, a foreigner in a kingdom of kings and queens. Yet Ilara felt an unfamiliar pull in her chest, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her toward him. The connection was undeniable, though she couldn't explain it. Her heart raced and her thoughts scattered. What was it about him that caused such a stir in her soul? She had seen countless men, warriors and nobles alike, but none had affected her like this. Princess Ilara, the soldier spoke, his voice deep and commanding yet filled with respect. I come with urgent news from the southern border. The princess blinked, as if shaking herself from the trance his gaze had put her in. She nodded, her usual calm demeanor returning. What news? She asked, her voice steady but with a slight tremor she couldn't quite conceal. The soldier stepped forward, his eyes still locked with hers. The southern borders are under attack by marauding forces. Our men are holding the line, but reinforcements are needed. I was sent to request your father's permission to send more soldiers to secure the area. Ilara's mind began to clear, and she took in the seriousness of the situation. The kingdom was always at war with neighboring factions, but this felt different. The urgency in the soldier's voice spoke volumes. This was no simple skirmish. But even as her mind processed the information, her thoughts kept returning to the man standing before her. She couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was not by chance. There was something about him, something in the way he stood, the way his eyes met hers. It was as if they shared a moment that no one else in the room could see. King Orion, who had been observing the exchange, spoke up, his voice deep and commanding. You may go, soldier. We will send reinforcements to the southern border at once. Thank you for bringing this matter to our attention. The soldier gave a sharp nod and turned to leave, but before he did, he glanced back at Ilara. His eyes met hers again, for just a split second. but it felt like an eternity. In that fleeting moment, Ilara could feel the weight of the unspoken words between them, something neither of them had the courage to say out loud. Then, just as quickly as he had come, the soldier turned and left the room, disappearing down the grand hallway. Ilara stood still, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. She had been surrounded by royalty and nobility her entire life, but never had she felt so drawn to someone. The human soldier was just that, a soldier. Yet, in his eyes, she had seen something that no prince or nobleman had ever shown her. A spark of something real, something deep. Hook. Could this soldier be the one person she had been waiting for all along? Or was this fleeting moment just a dangerous illusion in a life bound by duty? The princess's heart raced as she returned to her duties, but she couldn't shake the feeling that everything had changed. That soldier had stirred something in her, something that could not be ignored, and as the door closed behind him, she knew this was only the beginning. Days passed after that unexpected encounter with the soldier, but the memory of his piercing blue eyes lingered in Princess Ilara's mind. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw his face, strong yet gentle, standing tall amidst the royal court. She knew it was foolish to let such thoughts consume her, but she couldn't help it. For the first time in her life, Ilara felt a connection to someone who wasn't bound by the strict rules of royalty or tradition, someone who saw her not as a princess but as a person. The palace's routine went on as usual, but the princess felt trapped in her own thoughts. Her scheduled meetings with suitors, diplomatic talks, and royal duties seemed distant, like they belonged to someone else's life. She found herself unable to focus on her responsibilities, constantly distracted by the soldier's image in her mind. It wasn't until a week later that Ilara would see him again. The human soldier, whose name she had learned was Captain Kale, was called upon again to report to the royal family. This time his mission was different. He had returned with news of an impending attack on the northern villages, a serious threat that could not be ignored. Ilara's father, King Orion, asked him to stay and provide more details, and as the soldier began to speak about the danger at the borders, Ilara found herself listening intently. His voice was calm, steady, and filled with authority, but there was something more to it, a quiet determination that made her feel safe, even in the face of danger. "Captain Kyle," the king said, once the briefing had concluded, "I believe we should send reinforcements immediately." Kale nodded, his face stern. "I agree, Your Majesty. However, we'll need more than soldiers. We need strategy, better weapons, and time." A tension settled over the room. Ilara's father paced back and forth, clearly troubled by the situation. "Time is something we do not have," King Orion muttered, his brow furrowed in concern. Ilara sat silently, her gaze fixed on Kyle. She couldn't help but feel a rush of admiration for him. He wasn't just a soldier, he was a leader, a man who cared for his men and the kingdom even though he wasn't born into royalty. There was a quiet strength about him that spoke volumes. His loyalty to the kingdom wasn't something to be taken lightly. As the discussions continued, Ilara found herself increasingly drawn to Kale's presence. His passion for protecting the kingdom and his calmness in the face of danger stirred something inside her. She had spent so many years being told what to do, what was expected of her, but Kale's bravery made her question everything she had known. When the meeting concluded and the court members began to leave, Ilara stood up slowly, her heart racing. She hadn't planned it, but she found herself walking towards Kyle. Her steps were deliberate, and before she knew it, she was standing before him. "Captain Kale," Ilara began, her voice soft but filled with purpose. I wanted to thank you." Kale looked down at her, his expression unreadable for a moment, before he gave a respectful bow. "It is my duty, Your Highness." But Ilara shook her head. "No, not just for your duty," she said, her voice trembling slightly, "but for the way you lead, for the way you protect." Kale remained silent for a beat, seemingly taken aback by her words. Then he straightened, his usual stoic demeanor returning. "I protect because I must, Princess. It's my job, my oath." Ilara nodded, but a part of her felt a deep connection to him. a bond that went beyond duty or oath. She realized that the more she was around Kale, the more she saw him not just as a soldier, but as someone who understood her in a way no one else did. I can't imagine how difficult it must be, leading soldiers, and knowing that you might not return, Ilara said, her voice softer now, almost in a whisper. You're not just fighting for the kingdom, you're fighting for the people you care about. Kale's eyes softened for a brief moment, the weight of her words sinking in. He had never expected the princess to understand. No one ever had. To her, soldiers were faceless, nameless, tools of the kingdom's defense. But here she was, recognizing the humanity beneath the armor. It's not easy, Kyle said, his voice quieter now. But it's the life I chose, to protect those who can't protect themselves. Ilara looked up at him, her gaze searching his face. And what about what you want? She asked before she could stop herself. What do you want, Kale? The question hung in the air between them, leaving an uncomfortable silence. Kyle's expression faltered for a moment, his strong exterior wavering. He was not used to being asked such a personal question, especially not by a princess. He opened his mouth to respond, but the words seemed to catch in his throat. Before he could answer, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. The moment was broken, and Ilara quickly stepped back, her cheeks flushed with embarrassment. She turned and walked away, her heart pounding in her chest. As she left the room, her mind was racing. She had just spoken to him like he was an equal, not a soldier or a servant, and somehow it felt right. She had always been told what her life would be, what path she would walk. But for the first time, she was starting to wonder if she had the power to choose her own destiny. Kale, the soldier who had come from another world, was slowly becoming more than just a soldier to her. He was a friend, a confidant, and possibly something more. But she couldn't afford to entertain such thoughts. Her duty to her kingdom, her family, and her people had always come first. But deep down, she knew that this bond was growing stronger, and it was only a matter of time before it would change everything. As days turned into weeks, Princess Ilara found herself increasingly torn between duty and desire. The growing bond between her and Captain Kale, the human soldier, was undeniable. But with each passing moment, it became more dangerous. In the quiet corners of the royal palace, away from prying eyes, they exchanged words, looks, and moments that spoke of a deeper connection, one that no one else could understand. Yet in the grand halls of the kingdom, Ilara's future was already being written for her. Her engagement to Prince Darius was imminent. The royal wedding was just days away, and the preparations were in full swing. But no matter how hard she tried to focus on her royal duties, Ilara's thoughts kept drifting back to Kale. He was always there in the back of her mind, a constant presence that she could not shake. His laughter, the way his eyes softened when he spoke to her, the feeling of peace that washed over her when they were together. It was all so real. But that was the problem. It was real, and that made it impossible. She had always known that her life would be one of sacrifice. As the daughter of the king, she was expected to marry for the good of the kingdom, to solidify alliances, and to maintain the royal bloodline. She was not meant to love for herself. Her marriage to Prince Darius would bring prosperity and stability to Zoria. It was a noble sacrifice, one that her family had always expected her to make. But in her heart, she couldn't help but question if it was all worth it. One evening, after a long day of royal meetings and diplomatic discussions, Ilara slipped away from the palace's bustling corridors and sought solace in the palace gardens. The air was thick with the scent of blooming flowers, and the soft rustling of the trees filled the silence. It was her favorite place to think, to clear her mind from the weight of royal duties. But tonight, she was not alone. Kale stood by the fountain, his broad back turned to her as he stared into the still water. His armor, though not as ornate as the royal guards, gleamed in the soft moonlight. He didn't turn when she approached, but she could feel his awareness of her presence as if he had been waiting for her. "You should not be here," Ilara said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. The words felt foreign coming from her lips. She had never felt so conflicted in her life. Cale finally turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her heart skip a beat. "And yet, here I am," he replied, his tone steady, but filled with something deeper. "I had to see you again, Princess." Ilara's breath caught in her throat at the sound of his voice. It had been days since they had spoken in private, and in those days the distance between them had grown, both emotionally and physically. She had told herself that she needed to focus on her duties, that Cale was a distraction. But the truth was she couldn't stop thinking about him. No matter how much she tried to convince herself that he was just a soldier, that she had a duty to her kingdom, her heart would not listen. "Why do you keep coming back?" Ilara asked, her voice trembling with emotions she couldn't quite understand. She stepped closer to him, drawn by an invisible force that she couldn't fight. "You know this cannot work. You are a soldier and I am a princess. We are worlds apart. Our lives are not meant to intertwine." Kyle's expression softened, but there was a determination in his eyes. "I know who you are, Princess," he said quietly. "I know your duty, your role. But I also know what I feel for you and I can't ignore it. I've spent my entire life following orders, protecting kingdoms and fighting battles, but nothing has ever made me feel the way you do." Ilara felt her heart tighten at his words. The rawness in his voice, the honesty that echoed in his gaze, made her question everything. How could something so forbidden feel so right? "Kyle," she whispered, her eyes downcast. "This cannot happen. I am betrothed to Prince Darius. I have a duty to my father and my kingdom. This feeling between us is nothing more than a fleeting distraction. It cannot last." Kyle stepped forward, closing the gap between them, his presence overwhelming yet comforting. He reached out, gently lifting her chin with his fingers, forcing her to meet his gaze. His touch was warm, and for a brief moment, Ilara felt as though the world outside of this garden no longer mattered. "I understand your duty," he said softly. "But I also know that love isn't a distraction. It's what makes us human. And I know that what we feel for each other is real. I'm not asking you to abandon everything. I'm asking you to choose yourself. For once, choose your happiness." His words sent a shiver down her spine, and her breath quickened. She wanted to pull away, to remind him of the consequences of their connection, but in that moment she couldn't. There was something in Cale's eyes, a mix of vulnerability and hope, that made her question the path she had always walked. Was it worth it? Could she truly spend her life with someone she didn't love just for the sake of duty? For the first time in her life, Ilara was faced with a choice. The life she had always known, with its expectations and rules, or a life that was uncertain, uncharted, but filled with a love that felt real. The conflict within her grew, and the pressure of her royal duties seemed to weigh heavier with every passing second. How could she possibly choose between her heart and her kingdom? Cale stepped back slightly, his gaze still fixed on hers. "I don't expect you to make a decision now, Princess, but I will be here, waiting for you, whenever you're ready to choose." With that, he turned and walked away, leaving Ilara standing alone in the moonlit garden, her heart torn in two. The days leading up to the royal wedding felt like an eternity for Princess Ilara. The lavish preparations continued, each step reinforcing the life she had been born into, a life of duty, sacrifice, and obedience. Yet each passing day also brought a growing sense of rebellion within her. Her thoughts were no longer focused on the ceremonial gowns or the political alliance with Prince Darius. They were on Cale, the soldier who had shown her what it meant to feel truly seen, to be loved for who she was, not just as a princess, but as a woman with her own dreams and desires. Ilara found herself lost in the memories of their stolen moments, their quiet conversations, the shared laughter, the way his touch made her heart race. She had never known that such feelings could exist. A part of her had always believed that love was a fairy tale, something only found in books. But Kale had proven her wrong. Love was real. And it had come to her in the most unexpected way, through a soldier she could never have imagined being, a part of her life. But now she stood at a crossroads. The day of her wedding to Prince Darius had arrived. The entire kingdom was expecting it, and Elara knew that not fulfilling her royal duties would come with consequences. She was the future queen, the symbol of her people's prosperity. The kingdom depended on her marriage to Prince Darius. It was her duty, a duty that had been carved into her life since the day she was born. As she stood before the grand mirror in her bridal chamber, Elara barely recognized the reflection staring back at her. The royal gown, with its intricate, golden threads shimmered under the soft candlelight, but it felt like a prison to her. The weight of the dress seemed symbolic of the weight of her responsibilities, and as she looked at herself, she couldn't ignore the emptiness she felt inside. She wasn't ready for this life. She couldn't marry a man she didn't love. The sound of footsteps echoed in the hallway, and Elara turned, startled. Her heart leapt in her chest as she saw the figure standing in the doorway. It was Kale. His presence was like a breath of fresh air, and for a moment, everything around her seemed to fade away. Kale's eyes locked with hers, and in that instant, Elara knew that this was the moment she had been dreading. The moment when she would have to make the hardest choice of her life. Elara. Kale's voice was low, steady. He stepped forward, his face filled with both hope and sadness. I've been waiting for you. I can't stand by and watch you marry someone you don't love. You deserve more than this. Elara's throat tightened, her emotions swirling in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and longing. She had known this day would come, but now that it was here, she was unsure of what to say. The weight of the entire kingdom seemed to rest on her shoulders, and yet, in this moment, it was her heart that she needed to listen to the most. I don't know if I can do this, Elara whispered, her voice shaking. I've been trained, my whole life, to follow duty, to marry for the good of the kingdom, for the future of my people. I've been told that love doesn't matter, that duty is everything, but I can't keep pretending that I don't feel what I feel for you. Kyle stepped closer, his eyes filled with compassion. He reached out and gently cupped her face in his hands, his touch tender. You don't have to pretend, Elara. Love is not a weakness. It's what makes us strong. It's what gives us the courage to stand up for what we believe in. Elara closed her eyes, leaning into his touch, the warmth of his hands grounding her. She could feel the strength of his words, but the fear of the consequences still gnawed at her. What would happen if she chose Kyle? What would become of her kingdom, her family, her future? I don't know if I can leave everything behind, Elara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. My kingdom, my people. I can't just abandon them. Kyle's gaze softened and he stepped back, allowing her the space she needed to think. You don't have to abandon anyone, Elara. The kingdom can still prosper, even if you choose love. Love doesn't weaken us. It empowers us to fight for what matters most. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Elara's heart raced as she considered his words. Could she really choose love over duty? Could she walk away from everything she had ever known for a future that was uncertain, that was filled with challenges and sacrifices of its own? But then, a quiet realization washed over her. She had spent her entire life being told what was best for the kingdom, what was best for her future. But what about her own happiness? What about her own heart? The choice was hers. She could no longer live for others. She had to live for herself. With newfound resolve, Elara looked into Kyle's eyes and took a deep breath. I choose you, she said, her voice strong and steady. I choose my heart. I choose love. And I choose a future where I am free to be with the one who makes me feel alive. Kale's eyes softened with relief and joy, and for the first time Elara felt a weight lift from her shoulders. She had made her decision. The path ahead wouldn't be easy, but it would be hers. She would no longer live for others' expectations. She would live for herself. As the wedding bells rang in the distance, signaling the start of her royal wedding, Ilara turned away from the palace and toward the future she had chosen. With Kale by her side, she knew they would face whatever came their way. Together, they would forge a new path, one built on love, trust, and the courage to choose each other above all else.